Ottawa has delayed the review of its tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles that was expected to be released today. 1 year ago today, in fact, Canada put a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, accusing China of dumping cheap cars into other countries. But what's happened since? Well, from China's retaliation on Canadian canola to the Canada-U.S. trade war is leading some experts to call for the tariff to be adjusted. So for more on where Canada's EV strategy towards China could go next.
The first signs were subtle. In January, border traffic dipped slightly. By spring, it was a free fall. In 2024, Canadians made over 20 million trips to the U.S., spending more than $20 billion and supporting 140,000 jobs in border states. But when the tariffs hit and Washington's 51st state rhetoric started circulating on cable news, Canadians responded not with outrage, but with silence. They simply stayed home. In places like Maine, Vermont, and Michigan, shopkeepers stared at empty parking lots. Hotels that used to be booked solid with Canadian tourists now begged for weekend guests. Duty-free stores cut staff. In some towns, sales fell by 30%, enough to erase an entire state's tourism sector. Local governors called it temporary. Economists called it a correction. But quietly, business owners knew what it really was: a boycott born of pride. The U.S. had insulted Canada's sovereignty, and Canadians were responding in the only way they could: by shutting their wallets. And that's when the real pressure began to build. If tourism was the heartache, autos were the artery. Detroit and Windsor, two cities separated by a narrow river, have always been the beating heart of North American industry. Every car, every truck, every electric vehicle made on the continent depends on that invisible choreography. Parts crossing the border up to 8 times before they reached the showroom. But tariffs changed everything. Suddenly, a simple engine component or a roll of aluminum now cost 25% more. Factories began to stall. Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, went public with the math. Billions in lost trade, thousands of layoffs, and $2,500 added to the price of every car. Auto suppliers faced impossible choices: absorb the costs or pass them on. Some froze investments, others trimmed bonuses. Many simply shut down. The very tariffs meant to protect American workers were destroying the ecosystem that sustained them. The irony couldn't have been sharper. To protect U.S. jobs, the government had started a war against the one country that made those jobs. Then, something strange started happening. The same politicians who once called Canada soft or dependent began quietly booking flights to Toronto and Montreal. Louisiana's Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser was among the first. He didn't go for diplomacy, he went for damage control. His state's hotels and festivals were losing millions in Canadian tourism, and he needed them back. So, he launched a charm offensive. Press conferences, trade dinners, and even French-language ads saying, "We still welcome you." It wasn't just Louisiana. Governors from Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire followed. They crossed the border, smiled for cameras, and begged Canadians to return. But behind those smiles was desperation. Because everyone knew this wasn't about tourism anymore. It was about saving face and saving the economy before it unraveled completely. The breaking point came with one date, October 7th, 2025. A meeting at the White House between Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump. Carney arrived with a mission: to pull North America back from the brink. His goal? Ease tariffs, repair supply chains, and prepare for the USMCA review, the trade pact binding the continent together. Ottawa even paused its digital tax and retaliatory tariffs, hoping to clear space for negotiation. But Washington's tone remained sharp. No concessions. No weakness. Behind closed doors, both leaders knew the stakes. If this meeting failed, the continent's most powerful economic engine, the North American Auto Alliance, could collapse. Both sides began preparing fallback plans. Canada explored deeper cooperation with Europe and South Korea on EV minerals. The U.S. quietly began courting Mexico to isolate Ottawa. And in the shadows, lobbyists from automakers and energy giants circled, desperate to protect their multi-billion-dollar investments. Because this wasn't just about tariffs anymore. It was about control of the EV future. At the heart of it all lies one simple truth. North America's power isn't military, it's industrial. The Great Lakes Ontario corridor is a masterpiece of integration. Canada supplies the aluminum and minerals. The US designs the engines and electronics. Mexico assembles the vehicles. Break that system, and it's like cutting the arteries of an empire. Governor Whitmer warned it bluntly. Say no to Canada, and you're saying yes to China. Because while North America fights over tariffs, China is flooding the world with cheap EVs and batteries built on subsidized supply chains that the West can't match. If North America fractures, it doesn't just lose money. It loses the 21st century industrial war. The EV revolution was supposed to unite the continent. Instead, it's become the new battlefield. Factories in Windsor, Ontario, and Michigan were once building together. Now, they're competing for the same contracts. Battery plants that were supposed to be shared projects are being divided by politics. And as the tariffs choke supply chains, companies are already warning of delays, shortages, and job cuts. Meanwhile, China's BYD and Europe's Volkswagen are moving faster, undercutting North American prices by 20 to 30%. If this continues, the US won't just lose market share, it will lose its technological edge. Carney's warning was quiet but clear. We can't build the future by fighting yesterday's battles. But that message, it seems, fell on deaf ears in Washington. By autumn 2025, the numbers told a grim story. Auto exports down. Tourism down. Inflation rising again, hitting Middle America hardest. But the deeper damage wasn't economic. It was psychological. For decades, Canada and the US shared the world's most peaceful border, a symbol of unity. Now, that border had become a wall of resentment. And across the world, in Beijing, Brussels, and Moscow, rivals were watching closely. They didn't need to weaken North America. North America was weakening itself. Inside the White House, advisors floated a compromise, a limited tariff pause on Canadian auto parts. But Trump's base wanted strength, not diplomacy. Carney, meanwhile, faced domestic pressure not to bow to Washington again. The alliance that once powered the continent was unraveling, and the people paying the price were not politicians, but workers, families, and consumers. So where does this end? The October 7th meeting was supposed to fix everything. Instead, it exposed how fragile the entire North American system has become. Tariffs that were meant to shield American industry have backfired, hurting small towns, alienating allies, and empowering competitors. The US can't isolate itself without paying a price. Canada can't retaliate without hurting itself. And Mexico, caught in the middle, is quietly preparing for whichever superpower falls first. The future depends on one decision. Will North America unite or fracture from within? Because if it unites, the continent could dominate the EV century. a true minerals-to-motors superpower. But if it fractures, others will rise, and the empire built on cars, steel, and trust will crumble.